Today we're talking about when the INFJ stops trying to make people understand this is what happens. Because one of the things the INFJ is really good at is making people understand something. And I'm not talking about rationally making them understand in a way of, okay, A plus B equals C, that's one thing. But the thing that we're so good at is making people understand from a feeling point, understand where we're coming from. Give them an impression of this is how I want you to feel because this is the kind of emotion I'm trying to evoke. Remember, extroverted feeling is our second function, but that can be our downfall because if we're continuously waiting for people to understand us, we're standing still in the meantime. And today we're going to talk about how to use this power as a skill and not as a hindrance in our life, and how that in itself can catapult our entire life success. Before we get started though, I want to remind you, if you haven't done this so far, to download the poster on the 5 pillars to an INFJ epic life. And if you want to take it to the next level, then work with me one-on-one. All the information you find in the links in the description. Believe it or not, this topic today is one of the biggest hurdles for INFJs, and we barely ever talk about it because it's so subtle. But you cannot imagine how often I get questions from my one-on-one coaching clients or from people in boot camp, and it's exactly the same story of, I had this conversation with a friend and it made me feel so bad because no matter what I did, they felt, hurt. They felt like I attacked them. They didn't understand where I was coming from. And for the longest time, I'm trying to make them understand what it is. And I feel like I'm hitting a wall. And this is not something I only know from other people. This is probably the thing that I did continuously until I knew, okay, I needed to change. Like before I started this whole channel, right, the biggest transformation in my life that led to all of this was actually followed by a period of trying to make somebody understand where I was coming from. And I'm talking about trying to make that person understand for years. And in that time, I was just living in a limbo because there was nothing worse for me than what that person thought of me. And you might think, okay, but that's not the typical INFJ scenario, right? I mean, we are not the typical people who need other people's approval because we live life by our own rules. We're not the people who need to live within a box. That is totally true. We're totally okay with letting people think that we're different, that, there's something esoteric about us, that we're not like everybody else. But still, there are aspects of our personality where the impact of how another person feels about us is so big that it just stops us in our tracks. And those could be things like, are you a good person? Are you mean? Are you selfish? Like mostly things where you have caused another person to feel bad and that reaction just eats you up. Why is this happening? Well, first off, you are an INFJ, meaning you can evoke certain emotions in other people. That's just your nature. Extroverted feeling, your second function, meaning it's your creative function. So you exude an extroverted feeling, right? You create it. You make people feel something. And we are so skilled at this that we can make people feel something very particular. And then we feel responsible for it because it's like, okay, it's my responsibility because I said that and that's what the other person felt. But the mistake that we're making is that this is just part of our nature. You are not responsible for how another person reacts when you acted out of good intentions, even if you acted out of self-defense or a moment of weakness, right? You have the same rights to be forgiven as everybody else. But we don't give ourselves that privilege. We think we do have that power, so therefore, no matter what that person feels is our responsibility. The problem with this whole thing is that everybody carries their own problems with themselves. Everybody has their own issues. And if you are dimming your light in order to make other people comfortable, you're not really giving yourself the chance to live the life that you want. Then you might ask, okay, that's one thing to dim your light. It's another thing to make other people feel something. Well, true. But if you're not doing something with the intention of, okay, how's that person going to react? Like, I'm doing this in order to hurt another person, then it's actually not your fault. You have the prerogative to express who you are, your biggest power, your excitement for life. And if that triggers people, that triggers people, right? I mean, think about it. We're really talking about you saying, I'm going to light up who I am, right? I'm not going to dim my light. You express yourself, you live out, your wildest imaginations. If that in itself makes other people uncomfortable, not your fault. The same thing happens if you get attacked in any kind of way or you feel overwhelmed and you have a reaction to it because, that's how you act in that moment and that person feels bad. Again, yes, you might apologize for it afterwards, but is it really your responsibility that that person reacted so strongly? It's a fair question. Like, I understand that there's room for debate here because, like, where does it end, right? This is like a very fluid concept. At some point, you do have to take on responsibility. You can't just say, okay, I'm just going to be a bad person because that's just who I am. And no matter how the other person feels, none of my business. But here is the twist. Here's the thing that I want you all to think about and what really helped me in that situation is to ask yourself, am I thinking more about how I made that other person feel than how I felt? Right? Because if you're in that situation, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to think about how is that other person feeling? Oh, I overstepped my boundaries. I made that other person feel bad. Why though? Probably because that person made you feel a certain way. Why are you reacting this way? Well, because you were overwhelmed. You were in a place where you didn't feel good and you didn't have the capacity to also take care of somebody else. It's so easy for us to forgive others for how they're feeling. It's not as easy to forgive ourselves. And so very often we get in these situations where just by us being ourselves, just by us not being perfect, we create an emotion in somebody else because we're so good at it, right? Creative function, our second function, extroverted feeling. That's a skill. That's something that we're good at. And so we feel that we have to take responsibility for it. And we're not letting ourselves off the hook. And in what scenarios this happens the most? It's in scenarios where we doubt ourselves. If you say, okay, I have the right to state my opinion in a very, logical way, in a way that doesn't, offend anybody, that's just, my thing, you're probably not going to have any kind of problem if somebody gets offended by that because you are so solid in your self-concept of, I'm allowed to do that. You're going to think differently if you're not that convinced that you do have that right. You're not going to be that convinced if you think, oh, you're actually not very sensitive. You're actually, very selfish and you can just put on an act. But, it's not like this is how you really feel. And INFJs very often struggle with this because, again, it's our creative function. It's something we can do, but it's not something we necessarily are. And so this is where the dilemma comes from. And once you're in this situation, it can hold you back forever. Because on top of all of this, we're not only able to create an emotion, we're also able to anticipate how that other person feels. I mean, think about it. Why are we so good at making people feel something? Something very particular, something that we have created in our mind. We can because we can imagine how it's going to feel. Therefore, we're really good at analyzing how another person feels because of their reaction, right? We can read that. We can speak it, we can make it happen, but we can also read that. And so it's so obvious to us how that person probably feels that it's like an emotion that takes over everything. It's the prominent thing in our mind. And before we know it, we're so aware of that person's emotional state and we're completely oblivious to our own state. How often has this happened to you? I know if you're an INFJ, this has happened to you multiple times, like all the time. It has happened to me too. And till this day, I get in situations where I do have this sort of feeling and I have to tell myself, Listen, Wences, you have to think about this rationally. Just because the prominent emotion in your mind right now is how that other person feels, and that you might have, said something or done something that wasn't, the best thing you could have done because you were overwhelmed, or because you were human, or because you were just like living in the moment, does not mean that your emotions don't matter. Because the thing is this, the moment you reacted in a way that you might regret later, or you felt like, okay, I stepped on somebody's toes, or whatever it may be, in that moment you reacted out of your state. It might have been out of happiness, it might have been out of anger, it might have been because you're overwhelmed. But in 99% of the cases, you didn't do it intentionally to hurt somebody just because you were stone cold, you had no emotions, you were just evil. Yes, there are people like this out there, but this is not what we're talking about here. So I'm not saying you cannot get over this, you definitely can. It's just that there will always be new situations that are even on a higher level that now you can tackle. So the things that, rattled me years ago don't rattle me today, but there are new things I just hadn't had the chance to tackle. Now I get to tackle. But I have to rationally think about it, because my first emotion is, I overstepped my bounds. I wasn't kind to that person. I need to apologize. I did something wrong. And then I really have to ask myself, and this is something that thankfully I've gotten like a good hang of it, to think, okay, rationally speaking, now I'm so concerned about how the other person feels, but how was I feeling? Is it just because now I've calmed down and I can focus on them and I actually make it easier on them than I make it on myself? Or is it really something that makes sense where I should apologize? Most of the time I realize, okay, that person reacted in a way that didn't make me feel good. And that's why I reacted like this. It was a reaction. It wasn't something that I did out of bad intentions. And if I can forgive the other person and actually have sympathy for them now, I should have sympathy for myself as well, right? But it's not just that. Like, that is just the psychology behind it. But the point is that so often we do this because we're waiting for somebody to give us permission that we are good people or that we had good intentions. That it's so important for us to change that other person's mind that we neglect to actually change our own mind. To allow ourselves to say, you're good enough. And I'm going to focus on that. And that is something that we continuously have to do, and something that we continuously have to practice. Because if we don't, we get stuck. And this situation is something that attracts narcissists, is something that attracts like people who take advantage of you. It's a situation that attracts people who gaslight you. Because if you're so focused on another person understanding where you're coming from, forgiving you to such an extent that you're willing to continuously put yourself in harm's way, we have a problem, right? It's not just, as I said, that you attract people who aren't good for you, but you're not being good to yourself either. So this is something that really changes for INFJs once they understand this concept and once they start living it out. And I can only tell you, you cannot wait for you to feel like it. You're going to get in a situation like this. You're going to feel bad. You're going to think, oh, that person has a wrong impression of me. They will think I'm a bad person. I need to, come closer to them. I need to try to make them understand where I'm coming from, so and so on. These emotions will come up. And then it's on you to say, let me reevaluate that situation. This might not be the best way to think about it. You cannot wait for your emotions to change first. You first have to be in a situation like this, feel bad, that's okay, but then not take the action of, okay, I'm going to do something just to relieve myself quickly. Because what would be the quick solution? It would be to go up to that person and to say, I never meant to say that. I tried my best. This was not my intention, and so on. And you might say, okay, why is that a bad thing? Well, it's a problem because in most cases, that person won't tell you, oh, that's okay. I know you never meant to. Water under the bridge. If that person reacted in the first case already in a way of, oh, you did me so wrong, they are not going to see this as a way for them to also apologize. They will see it as a way of, yes, you're right, you were, mean, it's all your fault, and so on. I'm not blaming other people for this, right? We're looking at a person who does have some kind of, thing triggered in them. But most people cannot read others. And so the person will probably not be able to read you. They're not going to be as compassionate towards you as you have been towards them. So in most cases, they will not understand you. They will block you. And what do most INFJs do then? They try even more. They say, I've gone, 60%, you 40, now I go 70 and you can go 30. And then I go 80 and they go overboard and overboard. I know I've done this and this never leads to a good thing. So trust me, when you're in this situation, reevaluate it. Allow yourself to take a step back and think about how you are not being kind to yourself. Don't only think about how you make that other person feel. Think about how you felt. Try to put yourself in your shoes for once. The more often you do it, the easier it will be, and it will change so many dynamics, you will not believe it. If you want some more help in how to, strengthen that aspect of this is who I am, then get the poster on the 5 pillars. It will help you to, lay the groundwork. And if you want to take it to the next level, then work with me one-on-one. All the information you find in the links in the description. And if you want to watch another video now that is in alignment with today's topic, then watch the video, What Most INFJs Learn Way Too Late in Life.